My name is Linda Halloran. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and participating in our virtual workshop on uncoupling your money in separation and divorce. This session is part of Town and Country's ongoing financial wellness workshop series. We offer a couple a month, a range of different topics. And in addition to our members that are on the call tonight, we have a number of people that have joined us through the Kids First Center. And so we are glad that you're here and are interested to talk with us about this topic tonight. We know that separation and divorce can cause a lot of challenges for the entire family, and dividing family finances in the face of this life-changing experience is certainly one of the big challenges. And that's why we have partnered with the Kids First Center to bring you this workshop. So I'd like to introduce you to Tim Robbins. Tim is the Executive Director of the Kids First Center.
Thank you, Linda. We really appreciate it. And the more information that you all know, perhaps less conflict there will be during the divorce and separation. I learned something myself each time that I listened to the presentation. So again, Linda, thank you for the partnership, and let's get going.
Tonight, you can hear from two Town and Country representatives. Wendy Glood is manager of our Main Street branch in South Portland, and Chelsea Torrey is one of our mortgage loan officers with the credit union. And they'll be touching on a lot of different topics. Many of you, when you've registered, indicated you have some specific questions, and I think as we go through the presentation, a lot of those issues will be addressed. So we're going to delve into everything from building a new budget to fit your new lifestyle, exploring issues around what do you do with the house, protecting your credit, and a lot more. And I'd like to let you know that throughout the presentation, we will stop periodically to take your questions. If you have any questions, please be sure to type them in the chat, and we'll take some breaks during throughout the presentation to answer some of them, and then wrap up with some time for other questions at the end. So without any other hesitation, let's welcome Chelsea and Wendy. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. My name is Chelsea Torrey. I'm a mortgage loan officer with Town and Country. I've been with the credit union for just over 4 years. My previous experience was with the USDA Rural Development, where I exclusively worked with low and very low income households. Oftentimes, those were single parent households who were trying to navigate how to make homeownership affordable for themselves and their children. In my position with the credit union, I work still hand in hand with that rural development loan option. And I also assist members and non-members pretty frequently with navigating that process through either refinancing a current mortgage that maybe is held jointly or the purchase of a new property as they navigate that next phase of their life.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Wendy Glood. I'm the branch manager at the Main Street branch in South Portland. I've been with Town and Country for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I've worked in banking and real estate and owned my own childcare business. I enjoy helping members with their financial needs and budgeting. I hope you'll all gain some information that you're looking for with this presentation, and please feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way.
Thanks, Wendy. And I forgot to note once again that I am also on the board for the Kids First Center, very passionate about that program. I think it provides a wealth of knowledge to people who are navigating separation or divorce, and how to keep the kids first in the new homes that are formed from that. So it's a wonderful organization, and I would encourage everyone here to explore the programming for yourselves or for children in your lives that could benefit from those services.
At Town and Country, we've been helping members with their financial needs since 1953. We currently have 40,000 members, and we serve Cumberland and York counties. We have 6 branches, and they're located in Saco, South Portland, Portland, and Scarborough.
And why are we here tonight? The reality is that stress and tension between couples brought on by the pandemic has brought the discussion of divorce to the forefront for many. We're here tonight to try to help you navigate this period of transition and also provide some facts for consideration. The average cost of divorce in Maine when attorneys are involved is upwards of $11,000. Cases that involve children tend to be more expensive as you're working through kind of more delicate matters, such as parental rights and responsibilities, including child support, any alimony, separate maintenance, things of that nature. One point that we really want to stress is that child support is designed to protect the child from the economic impact of divorce and separation. We certainly want people to be mindful of that as they navigate the process and make it less of a personal conflict and more just really about the child or children involved. And the fact of the matter is that 2 households cost more than 1. So to be mindful of that as you navigate the process as well. And some of the questions that we frequently encounter in our work here at the credit union is how do I protect my money and my assets through the transition period? How do I transition from, a 2-income household to 1 income and continue to support my family and keep up with all the bills? And then how do I secure my own financial future?
So the financial impact of separation and divorce. Separating debts can be difficult. It can be a difficult conversation to approach. Know that the sooner you're able to do that, the better. Separation and divorce will lead to reduced income and more debt. So you need to stay in control of your finances in order to protect your credit. Making lists can help to create that picture for you of what you're up against and help you to figure out where to begin. It's important to know your whole financial picture before you can create a budget. Uncoupling your accounts. This is an area where it can help to make a list of accounts. Not everybody remembers all the accounts they have, so if you sit down and write them all down, and then you can be sure to close anything that you have jointly. Open your own individual account. You want to be sure to close out anything owned jointly in order to reduce your liabilities and maintain good credit. Staying in contact with your creditors and keeping the lines of communication open, making sure that your minimum payments are being made so that your credit's not being impacted in a negative way. Investment accounts that you own jointly should be separated as well. You want to reach out to the professionals that are handling those investments for you to find out the best way to go about that.
And dividing and managing debt. Dealing with joint debt can be a bit of a delicate process. You really ultimately need to work together to achieve the best results. If you can work through that amicably without, too much tension involved, then more likely than not, each of the parties walking away from the table will be a little bit happier if it can be something that's agreeable to everyone involved. A divorce decree does not mean that you're not obligated to pay debts. And that is something that is a sticking point following divorce and separation. I have experienced in my career people who have a divorce decree that says this person's no longer responsible for the mortgage, or this person's no longer responsible for that vehicle. And if you solely rely on that piece of paper to get you out of paying that obligation, you may be disappointed down the road when your credit is negatively impacted because of missed payments and things of that nature. So you certainly want to be, again, as Wendy had said, being proactive and contacting creditors to make sure that you're removing anyone, as an authorized user from your own personal credit card so that further debt can't be accumulated. Making sure that your vehicles, recreational vehicles, personal loans, all of those things are secured to one party or the other. that may involve a refinance of those loans or possibly a release from liability with the creditor, depending on who it's through. So certainly make that contact, take that extra step, and take that court order to the creditor so that you can work through that process. And then we'll also be talking a little bit more about the estate loan side of things, which is, of course, where I come into play. I work with people to either refinance and pay out equity to one of the partners, or looking at having to rework everything entirely and possibly purchase a new property. Sometimes Wendy might be able to assist someone with taking out a home equity loan to pay out that equity if the name has already been removed from primary mortgage, or if they weren't on it to begin with. Divorce where people were removed from liability per a court order, but they never followed suit with the creditor. And then 5 years down the road, they go to apply for a vehicle loan or a mortgage. You know, they're creating a new life with someone else, and they find out that they've had this delinquency that's gone on for years, or they have a home that's heading into foreclosure and they've missed notifications because they didn't keep their address updated. There are so many kind of wonky things that go along with that you've just got to be mindful of and make sure you stay on top of things, because it will negatively and adversely impact your credit down the road if you're not aware of what's tied to your name. And so a big part of that is protecting your credit score. Your credit is really one of your most valuable assets. Your credit is what dictates your eligibility for rentals, for credit approval, if you need a new vehicle or you want to buy a home. Can affect your approval for utilities, cell phone, anything of that nature can be adversely impacted if your credit has seen some distress. So making sure that you check your credit score frequently, monitor the credit activity. The credit union has a platform called Savvy Money that's built within our online banking, or you may utilize some other resources there as well. But as Wendy had said previously, making sure that you contact creditors if you're ever in a position where you feel overwhelmed with payments, or that your budget's just too tight to keep up with something. The sooner that you reach out to someone, whether it be the creditor or another financial expert, the sooner that you get ahead of that, the better off you'll be, because you can navigate that process with help from someone rather than kind of stuffing it away in a closet and trying to forget about it until later, because unfortunately it won't go away unless you address it. So making sure that you stay on top of it. Again, we can never stress enough that we're always here for people to help navigate that process as well.
Absolutely. So separation and divorce can turn one household budget into two, reducing the income and separating expenses. Making a realistic budget is important. Many people find that they need to change their jobs to support it. Going from two incomes to one can be super difficult. So make sure that you're adjusting your budget often. Many people right now are seeing an increase in childcare expenses due to COVID. Children are home more, so food is costing more. And some children are even needing more childcare, which is also an added expense. It's important that you continuously adjust your budget with the current time and situation.
Wendy and Chelsea, we have a question that was in the chat, which I think I can address this one actually, and there's another couple from the that came up with the registrations that I maybe we mix in right now, if you guys don't mind taking a little break.
Yep.
Okay. And the question that was submitted is there a Town and Country paper guide that helps people in separation and divorce consider some of these topics? And so yes, we do have in our blog section of our website a an information guide about some of the things that you want to think about when you're going through divorce in terms of like separating and going through looking at your accounts and credit. So yes, if you go to teachthefcu.com and go to our blog posts, you will find that there. And one of the things that came up also, some of the questions that came up, maybe if you just touch on how some of this information applies to unmarried couples, people that are going through separation. You know, what applies and what's different for them on some of the things we've touched on so far.
Yes, so I mean, I think that it's important to be mindful. You know, Kids First Center uses divorce and separation kind of interchangeably. We don't want people to feel like, oh, well, we're not married, so this doesn't apply to us, because that's just not the case. The reality is many people choose not to get married these days. You know, a lot of people think marriage is just a piece of paper. And there isn't a lot to it. Once you have children together, you create a life, maybe you have a home, you've got all of these things that are intertwined. You know, not everybody has the desire to get married or isn't in a rush to do so. So I think the big piece with an unmarried couple separating is that there's a little bit less legality to it in a way, but certainly if you do own a home together, and you're still going to be separating that property, whether you're married or you're unmarried and you're separating. I think it's a little bit different process, but I think these are all very valid points for discussion, and you may not need to work through an attorney to separate it all through just a standard separation of an unmarried couple. But they are still important topics to review, and you may work through it with attorneys, but you really don't necessarily need to, because you don't need a judge to give a blessing for a divorce or a separation. So,
and one other question that came up that maybe fits in well here before we go on is, you know, what if anything can be done, should be done prior to divorce starting with separating accounts? I mean, if you know that you are planning to go your separate ways, are there things that you can do on your own without being in the midst of the legal process?
I mean, I think a big thing here is, you know, if there's any reason for you to be thinking that, it's coming, it's down the road, we're going to be separating, it's good to try to have a conversation, right? And, you know, maybe start separating your accounts, closing the joint account. Just, you know, there's nothing wrong with having a separate account and, you know, living together. And if it works out, great. But at least, you know, you're being proactive in the sense that, you know, we can separate our budget and we can, you know, close the joint accounts and just kind of start heading in that direction. That way we're being proactive about this, so that when we get to that point, if we get to that point, a lot of this stuff is already taken care of, and then we just have to deal with, you know, who's going to stay living here and such things such as that.
Great, thanks. So I guess we're into budgets, huh?
Okay.
that's a good segue.
Yeah, I think so. This is perfect timing.
So living and paying the bill, it's really important to try not to rely on child support for your monthly bills. Try to think of it as extra. When you're making your budget, it's super important to base that on your net income, which is what you actually are bringing home. Adjusting your budget to your income is important, and prioritizing your needs and wants. It's a good idea to have your financial institution print out like recent statements to see where you can cut spending. Some people don't even realize until they look at their accounts and they see that, oh, well, I, you know, pay about $4 a day for coffee. And that can really add up. Maybe you'll be able to only get your hair done, you know, every month and a half to 2 months instead of every 4 to 5 weeks. It's important to cut expenses where you can when you're going from 2 incomes to 1. So continuously monitoring your budget and just kind of looking at what's happening in your account to make adjustments accordingly. So this is a great budgeting tool slide. We share this because it gives a basic overview of the percentage of your income to expenses. So a good rule of thumb is to keep your rent or mortgage at no more than 30 to 35% of your income. Your transportation, which would be such things such as vehicle insurance and registration, to 10 to 15%. Other living expenses would be things like groceries and heating expenses should take up 35 to 45%. And your credit cards and loans should take up no more than 10%. Working savings in is super important as well. It's important to work it into your budget because every little bit helps, and there's gonna be things that come up. There are a lot of budgeting tools online. Sometimes they're included with your financial institution's online banking. So national studies show that 40% of people don't have money set aside for a $400 emergency. 3 key savings to work on are your short-term savings, which would be for expected expenses, such as things for tires for your car or vehicle registration. You know those things are going to come up. And then you should have an emergency savings account for things such as that. Emergencies, things that you're not going to expect, maybe a medical bill for an urgent care visit or a cracked windshield deductible. So you should set money aside weekly for this because it's easier to save over time. Also, retirement account, you really should check with your employer. Sometimes the employers will do a matching contribution. If that's something that's offered by your employer, that's something that you should really take advantage of.
And so another topic that we really hear a lot about is how do I secure my own financial future? Obviously, there is always going to be a bit of a transition period when you are going from 2 incomes in a household to 1 income. It can ruffle feathers for a little while. It might take some time to let the dust settle and feel like you can get ahead of it. But oftentimes, when I'm working with people to get the home buying process done or possibly a refinance, recovering from joint debt can be a huge aspect that can linger for a long time if it goes unaddressed. So one of my kind of sayings is set aside your pride. Don't let credit card debt, from 5 years ago that was supposed to be taken care of by your ex haunt you for the rest of your life, because it won't just disappear. You want to make sure that you are resolving those items, and that's where that court order or divorce decree comes into play. Is if you resolve something that was supposed to be taking care of the other party per that order, then you should be taking care of it, as your means allow you to. And then if you need to revisit the court and say, hey, I took care of this. This is something that the other party was supposed to do. Can you please help me recover this? Because again, your credit score and your credit standing is going to be a huge impact on all other aspects of your life moving forward. So you don't want to let those types of things just hold you back. Converting revolving debt to installment, some relationships, sometimes you've got spending habits in the relationship, or in one person in the relationship may have some different spending habits. You want to make sure that there's not large lingering balances of credit card debt that are there. We work with people often to figure out a plan to consolidate that and convert it over to installment debts so that it isn't quite so adversely impacting your credit standing. And then debt to income ratios. That's something where sometimes people go into the court process or the separation process, and they kind of allocate these obligations more so as assets, thinking, well, I want the camper, or I enjoy the motorcycle, or, the boat is mine, and addressing it in that way where they're not really thinking about the debt associated with the vehicle that they want to keep, or the toy, whatever it might be. And ultimately, you just really need to be mindful of that going through the process, because if you've got an income of $3,500 a month, but it's all being eaten up with car payments and RVs and motorcycles and boats and all the fun things in life that you don't want to get rid of, you're not going to have a lot of room for your housing expenses and the savings and the things that you really have to have some budgeted room for. So being mindful of it, putting the pencil to the paper is something that can be so helpful. The earlier that you do it, the better. And again, we're always happy to sit down with people and work through that process and say, okay, well, where are you now and where do you want to be? And what are some ways to help you get there? And, you know, just having the awareness of it can really put you in a much stronger position for the future. And so another aspect of the separation process that you really have to think about, you know, it may not be something that we're necessarily helping you through. However, there are some other important factors that need to be taken into consideration, like updating any wills, trusts, power of attorneys that exist. If, you know, most people aren't going to want their ex-spouse to be in control of something of that nature. So making sure that you're mindful of what is in place and what might need some modifications there. Your beneficiaries, so things like your insurance policies through your employer, your retirement plan, anything of that nature, you'll want to make sure that you're taking the proper actions to get those items updated. Real estate title. So a lot of times we tend to think about you know, the property that is primary in our lives, you know, usually a primary residence where you reside currently. Sometimes there may be some other properties out there, either an investment property that you hold jointly or a piece of land up north that maybe was inherited, or a family property, or possibly you purchased together. But making sure that you carry through that process of getting the deed conveyed over to, you know, the awarded party's name. Again, that's another thing where people take that divorce decree or separation order and they just kind of fly with it, and then 10 years down the road, that other person's name's still attached to it. So if anything were to happen in the meantime, that property technically would usually still go to the other person if anything were to happen to you. So taking the appropriate actions with the appropriate parties, the attorneys, to get a deed prepared is important. Name changes. You want to make sure that you're updating that with the Social Security Administration. That is a very important aspect. If you go to file your taxes after you've had a name change and you put in your new name, they're not going to recognize it. They've got your Social Security number linked to whatever name's on file with them. So you want to make sure that's updated for tax purposes, as well as for if and when you collect Social Security income. Your account passwords, oftentimes in a relationship, most people oftentimes will have one party who handles a lot of the finances or banking aspects. And so they may have the same username and password for a myriad of accounts. Of course, many IT specialists will advise you strongly against that, but also thinking about the fact that if you're separating, if that other person typically knew your account names and passwords and everything, you want to update those so those are more individually reflective of your new position. And then your direct deposits, making sure that those are going to an individual account and transitioned over from a possible joint account as they previously were done before.
So one thing I really want to touch with what you said, Chelsea, is I can't tell you how often I have people who will say, well, that shouldn't be on my credit report. My wife, now my ex-wife is responsible for that, or my ex-husband is responsible for that. It's in the divorce decree. It's great to have a divorce decree, I guess, that says who's responsible for what. But at the end of the day, the creditors don't care about that. You need to take care of that with the creditors. It has to be done. You have to refinance or separate your debt by taking out flex loans of your own, however you need to do it. But you've got to get those debts separated and out of each other's names, because otherwise you're going to be in for a surprise when your credit report is pulled and, you know, your loan officer says to you, well, it looks like you haven't paid, you know, you have a mortgage that you're responsible for. Oh no, it just doesn't work that way. You have to get it out of your name, whether it's refinancing or doing equities. However you can do it, it has to be done. The other important piece of that is to just make sure that if for some reason you're having trouble separating things, making sure the minimum payments are getting paid on them, because otherwise your credit will be impacted. So just being super proactive is important. Getting your joint accounts closed and opening individual accounts, keeping the lines of communication open with the creditors, and being sure that your minimum payments are being made. Get any loans and credit cards separated as soon as possible. Make a budget, revisit it often to make sure that you're making adjustments as necessary. Monitor your credit score often. And most of all, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what we're here for.
So some resources that we want to take with you tonight are Town and Country has, as I mentioned earlier, we have Savvy Money, which is provided through our online banking platform, links directly to your credit updates and credit monitoring tool there. There's also a money management component in our online banking platform, and a lot of other financial institutions may have that as well. You can also utilize annualcreditreport.com. It historically has been a resource where you could pull from each of the 3 credit bureaus one time annually to just check on the contents of your credit. Oftentimes we're very obsessed with our credit scores, but also just monitoring what's out there on your actual report as far as any collection accounts or obligations that were charged off possibly, or, you know, things that kind of get forgotten about sometimes. And so making sure that you are checking in on the actual contents of the report itself is really important with each of the 3 bureaus. Because of COVID, they are actually allowing you to pull it once a week. Not that I think that anyone really needs to do it quite that often, but it is a resource that's available to help protect people from fraud when it is at a heightened level during this time. You can also utilize, so I mentioned the money management tools. You can utilize very simple tools as well, like an Excel spreadsheet or just pencil and paper. You don't have to have a big elaborate guide to go through all of this. You just have to be mindful. You can just review, people used to balance their checkbooks. And unfortunately, many of us don't really do that anymore because we are so automated in our transactions. But it is important to be mindful of it and to look back at where your money's going and where it's coming from, and making sure that there's no duplication or there aren't unused subscriptions, things like that, that just kind of slip through the cracks over time. We forget that we've got all of these services now that there is so much automation. So utilizing resources like a personal financial planner or a public accountant they can do a lot more than handle just your tax records. So certainly getting input from them when you maybe have a bigger portfolio or some other quirky details there. Your attorney, oftentimes, if you do go through a legal divorce process, you're going to have a pretty solidified relationship with your attorney by the end of that. So certainly referencing back to them or shooting things off at them when you need to, if there's any changes as far as a support agreement or one party not following through on their end of the bargain. Those are certainly things to work out there. And then again, as we've touched on many times, reaching out to your local credit union or bank to get assistance from someone that you trust. You can also utilize family and friends, and sometimes people feel pretty green on topics, but you might know someone in your circle that can give you some updates there as well. So. And just a note from the chat. So did you say the credit bureaus are allowing a person to pull their credit request a credit report every week for free. Yes, at annualcreditreport.com. As a result of the pandemic, they have been allowing once a week. Historically, it has been annually. So that may change back at some point in time. I'm not sure when they'll end that, but as of my last check, which I think was last week, they still had it advertised as once per week from each of the 3 credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion.
Thank you. I think we've got some other questions that have been coming in. If you could take a second though, before we get into questions, and grab your phone and take a picture of the QR code. We have a short evaluation questionnaire that would be great if you could fill out and give us some feedback or other suggestions or questions that you have. We've got 2 that have come in. One was a question about property and deeds, and it is PMIs. It a concern if your name is not on the deed of your primary resident. I think that's for you, Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, things can be a little funny as people navigate that process. Most of the time, you don't want your name to not be attached for something that you're paying for. If you're the one paying the mortgage, then you want to get that into your name as soon as possible, because oftentimes people will pay on a mortgage. I've dealt with it with separations, and I've also seen it as inheritances, where people have inherited property from their parents or something, and they're making payments on these mortgages, but they're not getting credit for it. And your mortgage credit is a huge component of your credit rating and how that's made up. So certainly having it, having the mortgage in your name, but also the deed, the ownership. If you're paying for something, but your name's not legally attached to it, then it's about as good as paying rent. You know, you're not building any equity in your own personal real estate if it legally isn't documented to be in your name somewhere. It may have been documented through probate or of that nature, but I would always take that extra step to either make sure that that is on public record. You can also, with a divorce situation, you can file what's called an abstract of divorce, which will go on public record as, you know, conveyance of the property to you. And that's really most of the time just as good as a deed. However, it doesn't really allow you to modify it. So if you join another partner and then want to add their name to the deed down the road, then you'll have to go through that legal process again. But certainly making sure that you've got ownership interest in what you're paying for is very beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we had from when folks registered was about credit and credit scores. So I think you guys touched on it a little bit, but someone's credit is not necessarily impacted just because someone is going through a divorce. It's more has to do with getting behind on making payments or other things like that. Can you elaborate a little bit more on effects of somebody's credit score when just because they're going into divorce or separation?
I mean, the credit bureaus don't know you're going through a divorce and separation. So really what's important is, like I said, making sure that even if you can't pay extra, that somebody is making those minimum payments on your cards and your loans, because that is what's going to affect your credit in a negative way. If all you can make is a minimum payment, then great. That's going to keep your credit going in a good direction. If you need to reach out to the creditors and say, hey, listen, this is my situation. Is there any way we can, you know, work out some sort of an arrangement for, you know, say 3 to 4 months or however long, just really communicating with those credit bureaus to make sure that you are staying on top of it. So they're not going to be negatively impacted just because you're going through a divorce, but what's going to negatively impact it is if the payments don't get made.
Good, thank you. Another one about what should we do with the house? I mean, in this current market with a lot of demand for properties and not a lot of options of where to move right now. I mean, what do you suggest, or how, when dealing with situation with should I keep the house, should I sell the house in this current market? Any insights into that situation? Chelsea, that might be.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of these situations in the recent past. In many of them, unfortunately, it's a really tough time to have to pay out equity to a spouse. So I always try to, and I failed to iterate this in the presentation, but when we're talking about equity in a property, we're working off of an 80% loan to value. So you don't have 100% of the equity available to you in that situation. And sometimes people have gone to court and they say, oh, so-and-so is awarded the house, they have to refinance within the next 6 months, and they have to pay out X amount of dollars to this other party. Sometimes there's not that much available equity to give to that other person. And so we, under some circumstances, we've been able to get creative and work through that. And maybe it goes a little bit beyond that 80% loan to value. But honestly, it is something that you really want to discuss up front, and you want to be respectful of each other through that process. Just because the equity's there now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there in a year or 2 years from now. The market can shift quite drastically. I think we've been riding high for the past few years, which has kind of created this inflated valuation that we're dealing with. So when people are experiencing separations, you oftentimes have a lot more money at stake when it comes to the equity. Everybody's different financial profile is very unique. So there's no one answer for every single person. There's not a blanket solution to the problem. So I would certainly just, again, reach out to someone who can help guide that process a little bit for you. You can have a market analysis done, if most of us know a realtor. And so you can get a market analysis on your home done that will give you an estimate of kind of where the value is coming in at right now, so that you can help navigate that process as far as whether you're going to refinance and pay out some equity, or you're going to sell and then each start with new homes. There's not a one size fits all solution there.
We have another question. Do closing joint credit cards, once they're paid off, impact your credit score?
So closing cards at any point is going to impact your credit score. It's not going to impact it a great deal, but it will impact it a little bit. Just remember that, this is a short-term thing for a long-time solution, right? So this is a short-term little bit of a hit to your credit for a long-term solution, because things are going to start heading up, because you're going to be in a good place to having everything separated and just building on your own credit. So yeah, it will negatively impact your credit score at any time that you close an account, but it's typically a fairly small amount, and it goes in the other direction quickly as long as you stay on top of your payments.
Tim, there's a question here for you. Looking at the cost of child support, how spousal support's calculated, but moreover, how do you divide the bills to be fair in a legal way?
Child support, there's not a whole lot of dispute in the state of Maine about what child support awards would be, because we have a formula, and that so people tend not to fight over the child support per se. Now they may fight about what their income is, because the numbers that you use at the front end dictate what number comes out at the back end. So again, in planning for divorce or separation, really understanding what your income is, and it could be within COVID that it's take a huge hit. So a court would look at perhaps earning capacity, would not impute income during COVID that they might in other times. So So fortunately for both the payor and the payee in child support, there is a formula, and that's very helpful when you come to budgeting. And as Chelsea was talking about, and Wendy were talking about the working your budget, you can pre-plan and figure out some of those numbers without leaving the comfort of your living room, just getting online. The part that is a little more problematic in the state of Maine is spousal support, or we used to call alimony. And this is one of those places where it makes a huge difference whether you've been married or if you've not been married. Spousal support is only available under certain conditions if you are married. Maine is not a state. Some of you may have heard the term palimony, really a concept that came out of California, where people living together also needed to help support each other after the marriage, after the breakup of the relationship, and then when they were not married. Maine has nothing like that. So you could be together for 25 years and one party really taking the financial load. But if you've never married, spousal support is or alimony is not even considered. So that is one of the huge differences between being married and not being married. And I think the third part of that was property. Again, a very big significance, whether you're married or not. So if one is married, then there is a whole set of rules, statutes that govern how property is divided. Maine is what's called an equitable property state. And so what the job of the court and therefore the parties is to divide all the assets and liabilities fairly. And that oftentimes is 50-50, but that's not always the case. It's a case by case basis. If you're not married, this is the court has no jurisdiction in the case that's filed for separation. That is truly about children. It has no jurisdiction whatsoever to divide property. So if you own a home together, not married, have children together, the court can issue orders regarding the children and child support, but it cannot issue orders on the house. That was right now in the state of Maine, that's a separate lawsuit if you have to go down that road. And there's, quite frankly, not that many of those cases out there. People kind of work it out. Just one other comment about spousal support or alimony. There is no formula in the state of Maine. I'm actually on a committee that is working on coming up with a formula for spousal support, but right now there is no formula. So it's a little bit of the Wild West out there when it comes to spousal support and calculating it. And so just know that as you're going through, there are presumptions in the state of Maine. So if your marriage is under 10 years, the presumption is there would be no spousal support. Marriage between 10 and 20 years, the presumption is that it would be half the length of the marriage. And over 20, it's a situation where it could be general lifetime spousal support. But all areas where if you're in those situations, then you really do need to get legal advice to help navigate those, because unlike the child support, where it's relatively easy to figure out, the rest of it is a minefield for people that try to do it on their own. So there are resources out there. Again, as you're looking for resources about finances, know that divorce and separation law is state specific. So if you happen to be from New Hampshire, that you're in York County, that you bank at the credit union in York County, but you actually live in New Hampshire, know that the rules for Maine and New Hampshire are different. So you have to know what your state rules are also. There's no federal divorce or separation statutes that govern how child support is done, how property is divided, or how spousal support is done. Every state has its own set of rules. So, and it's hard enough knowing one. Knowing more than one is almost impossible. Linda, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
Oh, I think so. I think so. Tim, one other question. So, as we said in the beginning, we started this off, divorce is expensive. And a lot of times that expense goes to legal fees. So from your experience, any particular advice? I mean, some of the questions people ask is like, how do we do this in a way to reduce conflict, to be fair, to be equitable? How do people save money in legal fees over this process of dividing, resources and lives? I mean, any good rule of thumb or advice that you could share before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, ironically, Linda, one of the biggest things that people can do is doing things like this webinar, educating oneself as much as possible. So as all of us, whether we're going to a bank for a mortgage, if we're going to car dealership to get a new car, any of these big financial transactions, which a divorce and separation is, the more education you can have going into that process, the better off you are. And with the internet, again, just be very careful that you are looking at Maine specific information if you're in Maine. But it's doing things like this, is getting educated and really understanding that the process does not have to be a war. It can be, there's all sorts of different ways of approaching it, even if the emotional part of this, which we haven't even touched upon tonight, not part of the this discussion, but even if you're upset and angry, you need to really keep an eye on that this is a business arrangement, and we need to go into this with respect and being educated, thinking about using other tools besides court. Mediation is required in the state of Maine. If you don't agree, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And we have some great mediators in the state of Maine that help people through this process. And each time you can come to an agreement in mediation, that reduces the cost. So my biggest takeaways are educate yourself, avail yourself of as much information, whether that's through things like this on the child side through the Kids First Center, but then using tools like mediation to the more that you can agree to, either on your own through mediation, the less it's going to cost. I mean, ultimately, the cost is the cost of conflict. And so decide out of the gate that the conflict is not worth it. It's much better to spend that $10,000 that you'd pay for a divorce or more and put it in your kid's college fund, or start a new life with a down payment for a house. Those are long-term solutions. And I'm an attorney by training, so I can say this, that it's money better spent if you just agree ahead of time that a solution that gets me to the next step in my life is going to ultimately be, in the long term, much less expensive than just going in and going to work. So again, it's doing things like this, going to Kids First Center, going to mediation, narrowing down the issues, and hopefully on the other end, and getting support for the emotional side of things too. I mean, you can't ignore that. You got to take care of yourself. So the more you can take care of yourself during any process like this, again, the cheaper it gets. So those would be my tips.
I think they're good tips. Well, our time is up, and so I want to say thank you to Wendy and Chelsea for their presentation, and for Tim and the folks from Kids First to sponsor this with us. Wendy and Chelsea's email addresses are on the screen, so if you've got specific questions for either of them, please feel free to reach out, and you can also reach out to Kids First Center at, I believe, kidsfirstcenter.org. To find
Correct.
Tim and other people there. So thank you so much for participating tonight, and have a good evening.